You are listening to the Baobab Project. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us under the Baobab tree from wherever you are in the world today. We are joining you from Halifax, Nova Scotia. We've got so much to explore, from culture to lifestyle to health, relationships, education, and so much more. Now over to our podcast host for today.
We are joining from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and we have so much to explore. My name is Lillian, and I'm going to be your co-host for this podcast. With Leah, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leah Jones. I joined the Baobab Tree discussions in my practicum and continuing today and really enjoying being a part of it all. So today we want to talk about something specific, and that's the term tomboy. I looked up an article, a few actually. The one that struck me is Tomboy as a Protective Identity by Tracy Craig and Jessica LaCroix. There's a discussion on calling yourself a tomboy, and the authors identified 3 primary protections that this term offers to women: excusing masculine type behavior, protecting females from sexual orientation presumptions, providing protection for lesbians who prefer to remain viewed as heteronormative, and it gives access to male-dominated circles. So I want to take this discussion a little bit further and address how females are expected to perform socially sanctioned roles culturally. As a white settler, I use this label for the same protections I mentioned. I wanted to play football, go fishing, camp in remote places, play soccer, hockey, and lift weights, which, by the way, I did. I pioneered females being able to take industrial arts over home economics in the area I lived in many years ago, and that was not an easy battle. In reminiscing, I asked myself, why did I feel I had to accept this label so that I wouldn't be judged while being judged for taking on that label? Is this a worldwide phenomenon, this need to use the tomboy label to protect and excuse ourselves as females going against the grain, or have other cultures tackled these expectations differently? So this brings me to our discussion today. In other contexts and cultures, what are the expectations placed on females regarding how they behave and dress? How are these expectations imposed, and what sanctions occurred when females challenged their defined roles? So thanks so much for co-hosting with me and hopefully offering some enlightenment on being here and doing female culturally. Let's start with our own cultural context. I'm a white settler. I'm Irish, Welsh, 50-50 right down the middle. My uncles came across on the boat during the potato famine at 14 and 15, and that's how a part of my family landed here. And I certainly grew up in a very defined environment. My parents had very clear ideas on what being female meant, and being ladylike in their eyes meant. What about yourself? What's your cultural background?
So I'm from Mozambique, a country in Southeast Africa, and we're native from Mozambique. We grew up in a very conservative society, where roles are very defined.
Wow. It's kind of neat on different sides of the world. We had these very defined roles that we were supposed to perform. So if you look at your memories, how were you told to behave or dress in accordance with societal norms and expectations of the female? For me, I was not allowed to show my knees. If I was wearing a dress, it had to be below the knee. I'm not sure why a knee is so attractive in any culture, but I was raised in a very strict religious cult, so we were not allowed to wear pants ever to church. I did fight with my parents once and wore a pantsuit. I was shocked that I won that battle, but probably because I was 4. I was just little, so they gave in once. But other than that, I absolutely had to wear a dress. I had to sit with my legs crossed. I couldn't tuck them up under me or cross them at the end. I had to sit very, so everything was dictated by their idea of what was ladylike. And that was the only acceptable behavior. What about for yourself? What are some of the, like, did you have to dress a certain way or?
So it was quite the opposite for me, actually. As I said, in Mozambique, society is very conservative there, so women are expected to wear dresses, skirts, these type of clothing. In my family, my mom never let me wear a dress or a skirt, mostly because of the way I behaved. It was when I was younger, I would run a lot, jump, wearing a dress when the wind's too cold.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was not happy with the fact that my dress, I did not care how how I behaved while I was wearing those type of clothes. So she always made sure I wore pants so that no one would have to see my panties when I was running and or jumping or
Yeah.
being careless. Like you, were always taught to sit with your legs closed as well. We had all these kind of behaviors, and we were taught that they were ladylike. And
That term haunts me.
If we didn't do it, it was rude. So we had no choice.
Yeah, very similar. I think I drove my parents a little crazy because I was never good at restrictions. And even today, I still don't like being told what to do at all by anyone ever. And I'm not very good at following rules, but I think that was a big part of where it came from because we weren't just to dress a certain way and sit a certain way. We were subservient to men. That's how I was raised. Very subservient. We had to understand that our position was lower, that the men in our lives had the say. And at the end of the day, we didn't have a say. If it was overruled by our husband, that was the end of the discussion sort of thing. So, and I never understood why if there had to be that difference, why men and women had to be on different levels or tiers or steps, however you want to look at it. I didn't understand why there had to be a divide. And I wanted to prove, because something that I was always told growing up in that environment was that women are the weaker sex. Constantly. And so for me, it was, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove that we're not. I'm going to prove that we're just as tough and we're just as strong. And there was a 4-year age gap between me and my brother. And it wasn't that uncommon for me to beat up the kids that were picking on my brother. So if you can imagine, I was a feisty little thing for sure. But this ladylike idea of what's acceptable and not acceptable as a girl went to the extreme, I think, with my family and culture. Because just a great example would be music. As you're going through school, you pick an instrument and you learn how to play that instrument, and everybody has their preferences. Well, I wanted the drums. I wanted to play the drums. I've always been fascinated by drummers. That's the part of the song that I love the best, with a good beat, and that's what I wanted. But Dad decided that playing the drums was not ladylike, and so I wasn't allowed to play the drums. So when it came time to pick an instrument, everything was chosen because I found out after I chose drums I wasn't going to be allowed to, and I ended up with the French horn. Well, what instrument with a spit valve is more ladylike than a set of drumsticks? I would think, What about yourself? Were there any kind of what were some of the other, aside from dress, that was expected of you as a girl?
Cooking.
Oh,
Yeah, we were expected to cook, to know how to cook pretty young. I never liked cooking. Well, that was one of the many battles I had growing up.
so how young, when you say really young, how young were those expectations kind of put on you?
Around 9, 10, 11, around there.
Okay,
Yeah. So looking after my siblings, my brother specifically, make sure he's eating, stuff like that.
right.
So these kind of responsibilities we were given. Um, I always had arguments with mom about cooking because I didn't like the kitchen. Well, because it's a trend, a societal trend, I grew to accept it.
Right.
At the beginning, it was a bit difficult. I didn't like it at all. But with time, it just became more accepting of of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's everywhere around us, these expectations of performing as a woman, wearing certain things, talking a certain way, right down to the gestures, to the musical equipment that you choose in school, the courses you take. It's not always overt. Do you find that sometimes you feel yourself swept in a direction by teachers or elders in your community, that not overtly this is what you need to do because you're a female, but you knew that you needed to go in one direction or another, kind of? Did you have that at all? Like,
Yeah, we did. I think all women there have that. Their lives are pretty much dictated by
oh
their
no,
genders.
yeah,
Um, I think now society is being more open and relaxing more on these kind of roles and responsibilities. A lot of
yeah,
it is because more people are being more informed and there's less rigidity in following these rules. But back then it was strict.
yeah. There were not a lot of choices back then.
Yeah.
So, how do you think that this influenced your development? How do you think that this? I mean, we were both, I would say, we were both pressured to conform. But if these criticisms hadn't been in place, do you think that you would have behaved differently?
Yes, I would. For starters, I would not know how to cook.
That's awesome.
um, a lot of how I conduct myself or how I behave on a day-to-day basis would not be the same.
Yeah, it still has an effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's because that's how we were shaped,
Yeah.
right? We learned how to behave this way in our early years of
Right.
life,
Yeah.
right? That's where you learn the basics.
Yeah.
And that's how the lessons you learn at early ages those are the lessons you keep for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's hard to, anyways.
No, it's hard to imagine being outside of that. What would we be like if we weren't?
Correct. Those are your boundaries. Yeah, the foundation of the rules.
Yeah, shapes us. Yeah. Yeah, I felt I was isolating myself by using the label tomboy, even in today's society. So I recently realized what I was doing, and I decided to never use that term again. I grew up confused about who I was because I liked roughing it camping. I enjoyed labor-intensive chores. I liked fishing. My job was to gut the fish with my father and brother and their male friends. I regarded being a female as a weakness. And my family preached, women are the weaker sex, like consistently, constantly. And yeah, I was determined to demonstrate that females had strength and they had power. I actually started lifting weights in grade 6 and continued up until grade 11. I competed in arm wrestling in high school. I was the only girl on the soccer team, the only girl playing football, the only girl on the outdoor rinks playing hockey. I garnered a reputation of being tough and strong, despite being one of the most insecure people. And I carried it like a shield. When I talk about growing up, I always began with the caveat back when I was such a tomboy. So, why do you think that we needed to kind of say that? Why do you think that necessity of the term tomboy exists? Like in your opinion, when someone says I was such a tomboy, like what does that mean for you?
The word helped certain women. It describes certain behaviors, and for those behaviors to be okay under that term. So it was more like an excuse to behave the way they were.
Yeah.
It also protected them from sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it gave them access to male dominated circles.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, did you fight gender norms? You talked a little bit about when you were little, or did you end up kind of accepting them and just kind of going along with them? Like for myself, I fought gender norms where I could. I would find these pockets, like school, for example, where classes were defined. And back in my day, many moons ago, over 30 years ago, there was a strong delineation between, courses that girls took and courses that boys took. And you didn't really fight that. You didn't say, well, I want to take this class. You went where you were expected to go, kind of thing.
Oh no, I never obeyed the norms. I would call myself a tomboy today, but back then I didn't care. I just did what I liked. I played football a lot when I was younger. I was actually in the school's football team.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And growing up into high school, back there, sciences, physics, the natural sciences, physics, biology, chemistry, these were male-dominated classes. I was in all of those.
Nice.
I didn't care. I just did what I liked. But in my mind, I did not think I was fighting the norms. And I didn't get any sanctions or, repercussions from others by doing that. So looking back and reflecting today on how everything was back then, I think I was fighting.
Quite the rebel.
But back then, it didn't feel like it was a fight. I just did what I liked.
Yeah, back then for me, I guess it would be the opposite. I could not have felt more out of place. Mom would spend so much time. I had ridiculously long hair, and she would French braid it, and she would do it in these braids that were so perfect, but so tight, and I would have headaches for days, and putting perming my hair, tight curls, just frilly lacy dresses. Mom wanted to dress up her little girl, and I hated all of it. Poor mom, but I hated all of it. I remember yelling at mom one time, which was something that may have happened once in 20 years, because we did not question our parents ever. What did I say? Something like, "You want me to look ugly?" To me, it just was not. I don't know. It was like being wrapped up in bandages, or what are those suits called where you can't move, restraining vest or whatever. It felt so confining and just unnatural to me. So I kind of grew up feeling like I just didn't fit in anywhere because girls were expected to dress and act and behave a certain way, and I didn't want to. And boys just seem to have all the freedoms in life and then some, and I wanted that, so I fought tooth and nail for everything. And I think there was a part of me, well, I know there was a part of my dad that was really proud because he liked seeing this feisty little thing, but he couldn't really show that because that would be against, the religious sanctions that we were living under, sort of thing. So, I would see this kind of quiet pride in dad's face, but he would never say it. And I would see the frustration in mom's face because, I just wasn't behaving the way, that they wanted me to. That was ladylike. Gosh, I think that term's going to haunt me forever, being ladylike. There was just such an importance put on the perception of everything you said and did and how you represented yourself. And you just had no choice but to represent yourself as this very chaste, quiet, demure female, which I just didn't fit at all. I wasn't quiet. I wasn't demure. I didn't know my place. I fought against it all. But I think, we talked briefly about this earlier. If they weren't there, how would we be different? And I just don't know. I just think everything in my life, including my personality, I think it would all be different if I had those freedoms versus, being in that cage.
It would be like imagining something with no shape
Yeah.
or form.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing defined about it. Yeah, I like that. I always say, not always, I often now, especially in the last few years of university education and life, that we're moving towards a genderless society. And I've talked about that with a few of my friends. And when I say genderless, I always see this look come across their face, almost like a verbal eye roll. Oh, here we go. And we're just going to throw gender out the window, that kind of thinking. But I don't mean that we're no longer going to have men and women. Everyone's going to be an amorphous blob of genetics. I mean that we don't judge abilities based on gender anymore, that we don't put behavioral expectations on gender-based behavioral expectations on persons. So do you think we're moving towards a genderless society? And what do you think that would look like?
I think that society today is more informed than yesterday's society. There's more openness towards gender activities or activities certain genders to do.
Yeah.
For example, we see today more engineers that are girls.
Yeah.
Compared to yesterday. So there's people are being more accepting of that. However, there's still ways to go. We're not completely, there are still some societies or some places where there is separation of roles for women and men.
Yeah.
Well,
we still have 30 countries where FGM is practiced. So
yeah. But we've come far.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's a motive for celebration. Yeah, and what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's more fluidity. I think that the social evolution that's rolling like a great big ball of moss, I think it comes from how globalized we are now. And like you say, we're more informed. I think that access to information has really propelled that social evolution. When I think back to my school days, we didn't have internet. If you wanted to learn something, you went to the library to find it. Everybody bought encyclopedias. That was our research. Anything that we knew about the world was fed to us through media, not social media, because that didn't exist back then. So it was easy to live in a bubble.
Yes.
And it was so much easier for our parents to control that bubble and control what enters and doesn't that bubble. Because of the religious background that I had, we were further bubbled or caged, really. We were further caged because we weren't allowed to look outside the religious publications for information. We weren't allowed to research other religions or the world around us. We were very directed. So it was very easy to control, manipulate, and form thinking because we had that cage. Whereas now, I can go on and I can Google any subject and just learn a whole lot. Some fact-based and some not fact-based. Of course, you got to parse through what's, if it's on the internet, it's real. No, that's not true.
Yeah, that's another problem that's rising.
But if we took away these titles, if a norm is not a norm anymore, how do we go forward? I think about, our parents that had these very clear black and white ideas of what the world is and how we're to perform in the world. And we're kind of exploding that. We're throwing all that out and saying, well, no, if you're female, you can show your knees. You can play that sport. We're not living that way anymore. And we have the LGBTQ plus window that's opened up. I don't know how it was for you in school, but when I was in school, of course, the LGBT community existed back then, but they were nowhere to be found. They weren't
To be seen.
No, if you even spoke effeminate, what was considered, if you were male and you spoke effeminately or dressed, even bright colors, everything was judged, and especially in school. And I can honestly say that I knew of one person that belonged to the LGBT community, and that's it, in a school of 1,000. So I know there were more, but I never knew who
They were.
No, you were going to get beat up. You were going to get bullied. You were going to get made fun of. It was the cool thing to do back then. So, yeah, I wonder how they get their heads around all of this. It's something we can talk about openly, but it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't talk about that openly.
That's right.
So we get rid of these caveats that explain our behavior, and we act the way we want, but we've gotten rid of all of these norms that we grew up with. So where does that leave us, kind of thing, right? Like, what do you think? If you could start in society now versus when you did, like, what do you think would look different? Or do you think it would even look any different? Because we're talking about this, the schools are talking about this, it's this more open topic, we understand more about it, but we have generations behind us that don't understand any of it and don't want to. They're afraid of all of this newness. Where do you think where does that put us as kids? Like, for me, I can't imagine my parents being any other way than they are. Mostly because of that cage, right? So they're not super exposed to reality.
So for me, it's the same. Because teachings that are passed through that way from one generation to
Right.
another
Yep.
tend to last very long.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I said at the beginning. Lessons we learn from a young age are the ones we stick with throughout. It's really hard to break those. Um,
It's programming, right?
yeah. So information now is important. We do change, but it's slow.
Yeah.
So if I were to be born today, um, don't think much would change.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say I was given some freedom, not with regard to my choice of clothing because of how I behaved, but I did get freedom to choose the things that I did or studied. Like I studied physics when everyone else studied history and geography.
Right.
All the other girls studied history and geography. I played football when all the other girls played tennis. So I had some freedom,
Right.
which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, not much. Cooking? That's not up for debate.
Yeah, I actually, that's one thing I'd love to do, but for others. I love to cook for others. I don't generally like to cook for myself. Um, but I just, yeah, I mean, we've gone through so much in the last 20 years. It's it's a black and white existence. I mean, it's not a black and white existence, but it's that much contrast. You know, when I think about my son is almost 18 and his philosophies in life. And yeah, I was a big part of that, but he's very much a proponent of you love who you love, and judgment and judging others is not part of his vocabulary. And that's all that I was raised with. I mean, every single person that you met, you judged based on how they talked, what they wore, how they acted. Um, Now, a lot of that came from religious influence, because everyone that wasn't in that particular religion had a label and they were worldly, and so bad influence sort of thing. So that was very delineated. But now if we're looking at a genderless society and what that looks like, I immediately start thinking about sports teams, and course choices. I was directed to typing, and home economics, and things that were considered really the only available occupations as a female. I worked my way up corporately, um, and it took a lot of years, but I never really got past that label of secretary. You know, you could support the men in the office, but you weren't getting an office. And I wonder if that's, has changed as quickly, is changing as quickly, if it's going in that direction continually. And then I see, these magazines, Canada's top entrepreneurs, and it's a lot of women. That's such a different world than.
Yeah, more women are in leading positions
Mhm.
in today's world compared to back then.
The female boss is real. Yeah. Yeah, and we're talking about gender norms and expectations, and we can't skip over the opposite side of things. Not the opposite. Men and women are in opposition to each other, but the other side of things, and the expectations on men. I know we didn't have any questions about that, but it's hard to ignore. We did really want to talk about the female experience, but it goes both ways, the expectations on men. And my generation of women held a lot of resentment, and probably still do. resentment over someone having a powerful position but not earning it, and resentment over not being able to hold that powerful position just because you're a female. But, we're all born without expectations, right? So if you look at the ideology behind be a man, that's a lot of pressure. The ideology behind the man being the head of the household, and the breadwinner, and that's a lot of pressure on someone who may not want that. There's always two sides to everything. There's the repressed and the oppressed, right?
That's correct.
Right? But I mean, what does it look like going forward if we take all that away? Do we have sports teams that are mixed? Do we do that? Do we just mesh it all together? Do we get rid of any kind of delineation? Like, what do you think that looks like?
For starters, we could imagine a more balanced society, as in men and women could do more of the male-dominated jobs. It's hard to imagine something that
so ingrained.
Yeah, something that's you don't expect to see. So, but that's a good question. It calls on imagination.
Do you think, are we spitballing about this utopia existence, or do you think we're really moving towards that? Like, do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible, yeah. It also calls upon us to think what more we could do. Think outside of the boundaries.
Yeah, I like that.
So for now, I would say more women working in male-dominated jobs or positions, or doing male-dominated hobbies. It's already happening. We have a lot of women in bodybuilding.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely already happening, and it's really awesome to see. My only caution would be not to judge the individuals that embrace old gender norms. Some people are very comfortable and they like to know that, okay, this is my role and I'm comfortable in that role and this is the way I want it to be. I think that there's a danger in welcoming change and forcing change. Right? I mean, I certainly believe that FGM needs to be, for those that don't know what those letters mean, female genital mutilation, is still taking place worldwide. I believe 30 countries, from my last bit of research, where it's still happening. Those sorts of practices absolutely need to be abolished. There is no benefit whatsoever to having it done. So that's a bit of a controversial take on it, but that's not what we're talking about in getting rid of, gender norms and expectations. And that's not what we're talking about when we say accepting gender norms and expectations. Those sorts of things have to be abolished. But we do have large pockets of society that still operate on those old norms. And we still have men and women that's how, they think and act and live. And I don't think that we have the right to judge that. It's not about walking in and changing everything. It's more about opening people's minds to other possibilities and letting them choose.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with you.
The freedom of choice versus sanctions. I mean, you're lucky that you weren't sanctioned for, I want to say your behavior, but even that sounds wrong because you're just being you. But there were heavy ones for us. So I think that the introduction and of these norms and roles, and then the execution of them, I think probably along the execution is where I really started to kind of resent it, because that choice was taken away. This is who you are, this is how you dress, this is how you act, and that's the end of it. So I think that's a lot of where my resentment towards it all came into play. But that lack of access to information also had me, really kind of being a man hater for my formative high school years. It wasn't just enough to resent that they can do things that I can't. I hated the fact that they just had this power handed to them. And it wasn't until my university journey that I started to see the perspective on the other side of things. Not everyone wants that power. Not everyone wants that responsibility. Right. And they didn't demand it. It was put upon them, right? Not every woman wants to lift weights. Some are very, very happy cooking and cleaning and all those sorts of things. But even in saying the word cleaning, I find I get frustrated, because that's still a very female assigned expectation and role. We've come all this way, but God forbid we don't do the laundry, and God forbid we do all the cleaning. And where did that get lost, right? All right, we want equal, so you guys vacuum for a change. What's going on? I think that's probably one of the harder mental things to get past. What's like women's work? That's women's work. Why is that? So what do you think about the term tomboy, now that we kind of talked it all out? Do you think we should still use it, or do you think we should lose it?
I think we should lose it. Yeah. It should be okay for women, but not only women, everyone, to express themselves how they feel they should, or how they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Without having to find terms to justify their behavior.
Yeah.
It's okay, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the message that we see on social media all the time is being authentically yourself. And that comes from some self-exploration. Who am I really? If I take all of these things away and I just leave myself, where do I want to be, and who am I, and what do I want to do? I think it's wonderful that girls have so many more options now. Being on any kind of team back then, unless it was volleyball, which just wasn't an option, and now we're seeing them break through in the sports world and the business world, and it's wonderful to see. But I think it's important that we put our judgment aside and let people be who they want to be. If they want to follow the old world ways, then
that's okay.
That's what makes them happy. Yeah, as long as it's not an expectation put on the next generation kind of thing. So I know that our parents still have a lot to learn, and I hope that they start opening up to learning it. So not a lot. Mine weren't. And they've both passed since, but there was no teaching that was ever going to happen from our side of things, right? Yeah, there was no teaching Dad anything. So let's lose the tomboy and let's embrace however we want to look at our realities. And, this whole idea behind a genderless society, it's not about removing gender, it's about removing gender expectations, really. So thanks so much for joining me under the baobab tree to talk about this. And I'm looking forward to our next topics. coming up. I think that we should flip the script and talk about men and masculinity and what that means now, what it meant before. And, a lot of these questions that we had for women, I think can easily be asked of men. So I look forward to that. And thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you.